Henry VIII needs a son because his own father, Henry VII, snatched the crown from Richard III. Lucy, and those of you guys who are entertainers, when you grow up, you'll probably do some Shakespearean acting. And Richard III, Henry V, all of those are Shakespearean plays, and they're based on these guys, right? Because Shakespeare was writing during the time of Elizabeth, and so he would be writing about like her family. So Henry VII, Henry VIII's dad, snatched the throne from Richard III, and so he was worried that he was going to lose it. And if he just had a daughter, back then, people thought women cannot be leaders. So he needs to have a son. Now, because he was king, he had girlfriends on the side. I know, but that's just the way things work. And he had sons with them, but they couldn't inherit the throne. His children born out of wedlock. Why do you think that was? He has a son, but it's a no-go. Why do you think that's a problem, Kingston?
Because usually you could like when you were like a king or something, you could be with other women, but you couldn't like be it like show it to the whole world because it would be disrespectful.
Yeah, you had to definitely be circumspect about it, but also, Noah.
Actually, is it because he loved that girl more than the rest?
Well, maybe, but you couldn't. A child born out of wedlock could not be king because there was no way of proving his legitimacy. So a king and a queen make the new king. Does that make sense? So if you have kids coming from outside of that marriage, how are you ever going to keep stability? Does that make sense? So it has to be king plus queen. That's the only way. So if he has a bunch of sons with his mistresses, well, that's no good. Now, they didn't know how genetics worked, obviously. So he sees himself, hey, man, I'm making boys all over the place. This must be her fault. So he needs to get a new wife. Now, in the past, today, if two people didn't love each other anymore, they could get a divorce. But in medieval Europe, getting a divorce was a big deal. And divorcing a queen was a really big deal. So he needed to get the permission of the church. So he goes to the Pope and he says, hey, man, I've been a good Catholic. I'm the king. I need a son. I need you to do me a solid and let me divorce this old lady. And the Pope says, nope, can't do it. Because the Pope knows that her family are the rich Spanish monarchs, and Spain is more powerful than England. And the Pope refuses to give him his divorce. So now he's stuck with this woman. They're getting older, which means that it's harder for them to have children. And he's worried that the whole kingdom will be thrown into disarray. What to do? And somebody comes up to him and says, hey, man, have you heard about that Protestant Reformation? In the Protestant church, you don't need to ask the Pope for anything. And so Henry starts thinking to himself, that's a good idea. And so he creates the Church of England. And in the Church of England, the Pope isn't in charge, the king's in charge. And so once he creates the Church of England, he only has to ask himself to get a divorce. And so he says, self, may I divorce this old lady for this smoking hot Anne Boleyn? Of course, self, of course you can. And he divorces Catherine and he marries his second wife, Anne. Now, Anne was younger and she was beautiful and she was charismatic and she was a noble lady, and they get married right after Henry and Catherine's divorce. And things are going well. Everybody's happy. She gets pregnant. Good news. And so she gives birth, but there's a problem. She doesn't have a son. Now he went through all of that work, and there's another daughter. And Anne Boleyn gives birth to a daughter named Elizabeth. So now he has Mary with Catherine, and he has Elizabeth with Anne. They try again to have a baby. No go. Try again to have a baby. It's another miscarriage. And so now he's freaking the freak out. I have split with the Church of Rome. I may be going to hell. The people in my kingdom are extremely unhappy with me. Also, I could have a son, and you won't give me a son. Now, it's ironic because it's the man who passes on the Y chromosome, so it was his fault the whole time, but they didn't know that, so he blames Anne Boleyn. Now, he needs to get rid of Anne Boleyn so that he can marry another woman, but he can't divorce her because then it's going to look like he's just some person who can't get along with people. So he needs to find another way to get rid of her. Can't divorce her. What else can he do? I got it. He could kill her. But you can't just murder your wife because that's a sin. How to murder your wife but get away with it? So he accuses her of having an affair. Now, he's been having a million affairs, but it's different when the queen does it because the queen's only job is to give birth to the next king. So why would it be a problem if the queen is having an affair? Kezia, I'm coming to you. Why is it a problem, Kezia?
Because then it wouldn't be his son. It'd be some other guy's son.
And even if, like, we don't know whose it was, right? So with, if the queen cheats on her husband, then that ruins the legitimacy of the next king. So cheating on your husband is bad. If your husband is the king, then cheating is called treason. And the punishment for treason in Middle Ages Europe was to be hung, drawn, and quartered. That means that they would hang you by the neck until you were almost dead, then they would let you down. Then they would hang you again until you were almost dead, then they would let you down. Then they would hang you again until you're almost dead, and then they would cut open your stomach and your guts would fall out. And then you'd be dead. And then they would cut you up into pieces and send them to all the towns so that they'd be like, this is the result of treason. And so when he accuses Anne Boleyn, that's what she's facing. And he says, she's been cheating on me with her music teacher, with her personal bodyguard, even with her own brother. Now, is any of this true? No. But he needs to get rid of her somehow. So he trumps up these charges and then puts her on trial. And guess who is the judge in this trial? Kezia? Sorry. Go ahead, Kezia.
The Pope?
Nope. Good guess. Who do you think it is, Kingston?
Him.
It's Henry VIII. Yeah, he's the king. Now, he has other ministers that kind of listen to the trial, but he's the one that decides whether somebody's treasonous or not. And surprise, surprise, she's found guilty. But he doesn't give her the traitor's punishment. Instead, he decides to go easy on her and has her head cut off. And he even does one more solid, and he sends to France for a professional swordsman so that it's quick. But she does get her head chopped off. But now that his wife has been executed, he is single and ready to mingle. But at this point, he has divorced one lady and just kind of kicked her to the curb and cut another lady's head off. So people are not really excited to marry this guy. And remember, he's the king. He can't just marry some lady he met at the tavern. It's got to be someone of high birth. Now, another thing to know about Henry is when he was young, he was handsome and he was athletic and he played sports and he jousted and did all these cool things. But he's been spending the last 45 years drinking mead and beer and alcohol and eating honeyed meats. So he is supremely out of shape, and he got gout, which means that his foot was basically rotting off. So not super attractive, which is, whatever, man. But you add the fact that he's got this gout foot, he is extremely out of shape, and he is divorcing and murdering ladies. obviously people are not excited when he's like, hey, so you guys want to hang out? But he is the king and he needs to get married. So he's down 2 wives, and we get to his 3rd wife, Anne of Cleves. Now, like I said, most people did not want to marry Henry VIII, but he still was king, which meant that he was rich and powerful. So if you married him, that made you rich and powerful. So they find this woman from a small kingdom in Germany, and her name is Anne of Cleves. Now, he lives in England and she lives in Germany. So before they get married, they're writing notes back to each other, trying to see if they like each other. And they want to see pictures of each other to see if they are, attracted to one another. So today you could think of something like online dating, but they didn't have any of that. So they have their portraits painted. Now, if you are painting the king's portrait, are you going to make him look like a fat old gross dude who's like mean and scary? No. So they Photoshop his painting hard. They make it, they make him look high cheekbones, all this and that. And the same thing with Anne, right? They give her her best look. So when they get each other's pictures, Henry's like, all right, yeah, I can work with this. And Anne's like, hey, I heard he was a terrible, gross dude, but this guy looks all right. So the marriage is set up, and she is sailed into England. And when she gets there, big festivities, and they have the wedding all set up. And when they show up, she doesn't speak English. And so when he goes to talk to her, she doesn't understand what he's saying. And he thinks that she's being rude and gets very upset and offended. Also, he had been drinking and eating that day, so he's feeling a little gassy, and he burps in her face. And so he thinks that she's rude, and she thinks that he's gross. And when they look at each other and look at the pictures, they're like, wait a minute, this isn't at all what I signed on for. They instantly dislike each other, and they regret that this ever happened. But they're already married at this point. So what are they going to do? They have to get a divorce. Oh, sorry, I switched it. Before Anne of Cleves, Anne of Cleves is his 4th wife, sorry. After he beheads Anne Boleyn, he has his 3rd wife, Jane Seymour. Sorry about that. Didn't talk about. Jane Seymour is his 3rd wife. She gets married to Henry, and she gets pregnant. And what's more, she gives birth to a son. The one thing that Henry wanted, and she gives birth to a son, and his name is Edward VI, the future king of England. However, during childbirth, there is a complication, and Jane dies. So he has his son, but once again, his wife is dead, and so he's single, looking to mingle. That's when he gets married to Catherine. And after the terrible wedding, they hate each other. They think each other are disgusting. So they get an immediate divorce, and Catherine is sent to live in a convent. That's his 4th wife. But now that he's divorced, he's once again single and looking to mingle. Now, at this point, he is in his late 40s, early 50s. And he's feeling kind of down about himself, right? He used to be young and handsome and athletic, and all the ladies loved him. And now he's getting turned down by this nobody from Cleves. And he really is starting to feel insecure. And he notices in his court that there is a hot young lady, and she is a 17-year-old girl whose name is Catherine Howard, Catherine Howard. And she's 17 and smoking hot teen queen. And she wants money and power. He is an old gross dude and wants a smoking hot trophy wife. So they decide to get married. And they get married, and Henry's feeling pretty good about himself, right? Still got it. Even the young, beautiful women still love Henry VIII. He has still got it. But then he starts hearing murmurings from his friends. And they're like, dude, Henry, they don't know how to say this, but she doesn't love you. And Henry's like, how could you say that? Catherine Howard? Of course she loves me. I'm the king. Well, Catherine has been seen in some dark corners with some of her male friends. And I'm just like the eighth that says, I don't believe it. I'll never believe it. But soon they bring him evidence. They catch her. And he has no choice but to admit that his young, beautiful wife has been cheating on him with 2 different men. And what is the crime for cheating on the king, Kezia?
Death.
It's death. So she's sent to trial. The judge is Henry, and she's found guilty of treason. And she bursts into tears. She's only like 18 at this point. Please, please, I'll never do it again. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I was just young in my womanly passions. He's like, you had your chance. But because he says he feels like he's nice, he's not going to give her the whole deal. She is sentenced to be beheaded. And 3 months later, Catherine Howard is executed. Yes, Xavier?
Did they ever have, like, at some point, when Henry VIII was still there, did they ever have judges, like, that weren't the king?
Yeah, they did. They had judges. That's a good question. They had judges. They had a lot of judges for all different things. But for high treason, even in the case of Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, she would have judges who she was talking to. It's not like she was talking to Henry. She had judges that she was talking to, but those judges are only going to do what Henry VIII says, right? They're not going to find her innocent if Henry VIII wants her dead. So they did have judges, but, you know, in a land where there's a monarchy, there is no Supreme Court. The king just says, you're dead. So now he has cut off Catherine Howard's head and once again is single and looking to mingle. He has had 5 wives. He had Catherine of Aragon, who he divorced. He had Anne Boleyn, who he executed. He had Jane Seymour, who died in childbirth. He had Anne of Cleves, who he divorced. He had Catherine Howard, who he executed. And finally, he has Catherine Parr. Now, at this point, he is, in medieval times, the lifespan was shorter. So today, we all expect to live till we're 100, easy. But back then, you know, if you lived until you were 50, you were pushing it. And he's past his 50, so he's seen as kind of an old man. And remember, he's lived a very unhealthy life. If you're ever like just bored, go onto YouTube and search up Henry VIII's daily diet. And it'll be like, you know, 2 roasted chickens, you know, 5 pounds of bacon, you know, a barrel of beer or whatever. This guy, he was, you know, living an unhealthy life. And this was at a time before they knew about modern medicine and everything. So he's pretty sick. And remember, he had that disease with his foot and it's getting worse and worse. So his last wife, Catherine Parr, is actually kind of his nurse. And by the time they get married, he is an older man and they get married and she kind of just takes care of him. And he dies a few years later. But so he has 6 wives. The way to remember what happens to each of them is there's a little rhyme. It is divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. Because Catherine Parr outlives him. Now, as kind of scandalous as all of that is, his love life is important because it is official state business, right? This isn't like just some daytime soap opera where I'm cheating on you with your twin brother or something. Because his kids become the future rulers and his decisions affect everybody, when he breaks from the church so that he can divorce Catherine of Aragon, that makes England a Protestant country. Then that puts them opposed to the Pope. It also opposes them to any Catholic country like Italy or Spain or France. So even though it's kind of like, juicy gossip, it's also important politics. Now, remember, he has 3 kids: Mary the First, Elizabeth the First, and Edward the Sixth. Mary is the oldest, Elizabeth second, and then Edward. Now, who becomes king or who becomes the ruler after Henry VIII dies first and foremost? Noah?
Edward.
Edward the Sixth. But maybe due to complications when his mother died while he's in childbirth, he is born a sickly child. And people don't know how long he's going to live. Now, Henry VIII dies when he is still like 9 or 10 years old. And so he becomes king at a young age. And he is very devout Christian. In fact, he wants to make England even more Protestant. So he recreates the English church and makes it even further away from Catholicism. But he dies when he's only 16. That is kind of a tough shot. Your whole life, you're only 16 years old. But when he dies, there's no more males to inherit the throne. So with Edward VI out of the way, who becomes the next ruler? Who do you think? Noah? Who do you think?
Girl?
Well, I'm sorry?
The oldest girl.
The oldest girl. Does anybody remember who that is? Kingston?
It's no, sorry.
That's okay. Aaron, do you remember?
Wasn't it Mary the First?
It's Mary the First. Very good. Now, we're just going to wrap up with this. Mary the First is the daughter of Catherine, and she is not at all happy about what happened to her mother, right? Henry VIII divorced Catherine, kicks her to the curb. Her sad story is she dies of cancer shortly thereafter, and Mary lives in exile. So Mary is not happy about Protestantism. She's not happy about the Anglican Church. She is a Catholic. And so when she becomes queen, she tries to make England Catholic again. But people have been Protestant now for 20 years, and they don't want to go back. And so she starts executing people, so much so that they give her this nickname that is stuck with her of Bloody Mary. Now, you may have heard of like the urban legend, you say it in the dark. That's a whole different thing. Bloody Mary is the name given to Henry VIII's oldest daughter because she tries to force people to become Catholic. Now, when we meet on Wednesday, we'll talk some science. When next time we talk about history, we're going to talk about how the descendants of Henry are Protestant, Catholic, Protestant, and England will go through these problems of, are they Protestant, are they Catholic, for another 100 years. All right, you guys